This.
We're on.
All right, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Zocalo, your one-stop shop for all things Babylon 5, except for when we veer to the deep space franchises like we are this week. And today, boy, do we have a biggie. Norm, I know you're excited. I'm excited. I hope our listeners are excited. And today we are Threshing Threshold, the infamous, allegedly, episode of Voyager.
Yes, welcome to what would usually be a Zocalo, and we do Deep Space franchise because Char and I, we love all different types of Deep Space franchises. We know we talk about Babylon 5, but our backgrounds are very well steeped in Star Trek, and that's where the idea came from when Lieutenant Commander Ivanova said to John Sheridan, we're much better than another Deep Space franchise, or something to that effect.
Yeah, we're not just another Deep Space franchise, I believe was the quote.
Yes.
Something like that in terms of the merch. And so if you're new here, hello, welcome. So glad you joined us. We do this on occasion. However, next week we will be back to our Babylon 5 programming as scheduled. And we do have a very good topic lined up. And I'm very excited about that.
But for now, we're going to do something that Char and I have been talking about like ever since, we partnered up and started talking about science fiction. Char, your previous podcast experience was on Trek FM's To the Journey, which was the dedicated Voyager podcast.
That is correct. Yeah, I did that for 4 years, almost 200 episodes. We talked Voyager to death. But we had a very good time doing it when we did. And then we talked about it so much, though, that we started feeling like we were saying the same things over and over. And then that's when we thought, you know what? Maybe it's time to let somebody else take a turn. So we did.
And I'm just getting into kind of like my very first run through of Voyager. I've gotten through seasons 1 through 4.3 or 4, depending on how many episodes that I remember seeing in season 4. But the one episode that really stuck with me, maybe because of its historical debatability of how whether it's not the worst episode of Star Trek of all time, or is it misunderstood, is Threshold.
It gets talked about a lot, almost as much as the Tuvix debate, which for the record, I do not want to do on a Deep Space franchise. I'm so tired of it.
No, that's too heavy. This is a little bit more fun. But the reason why this popped up, and it's not like that Char and I didn't want to talk about it, but on January 29th, which was only last week, it was the anniversary of this episode. And it was
25th.
Kind of like the 25th anniversary of this episode. And it was kind of like spreading across social media wildfire. There have been opinions shared left and right, and, many cons, not necessarily many pros. But I've always felt that this episode needs defending.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a Threshold, I guess, defender, but fan, advocate for a long time. I mean, I am on hashtag Team Lizard Babies. I'm all about it. And the reason why is this. There are some episodes of Star Trek that are just so bad they're good. And then there's some episodes that are just so bad that they're bad. The difference between the two is those that are so bad they're good are the ones that you just learn to not take seriously and enjoy. That's the column that I put Threshold under. Therefore, I believe there are episodes of Star Trek that are far worse than Threshold. Does this thing go off the rails? Oh, yes, it certainly does. There's definitely problems with it. But is it the worst? Not by a long shot. It's more of a misfire. I mean, it has a big idea, has kind of a lot of things going on, and does not know how to wrap it up. So there was an attempt, as we said off camera before the show.
So in our
speaking of which, sorry to cut you off, but we did not do our customary salute. We're just digging right into it. Before all else, folks.
Yes. Before we get into it.
Yeah. 2, mind-altering substances, because I remember a Voyager panel, Star Trek Las Vegas. I don't remember if it was 2015 or 2016. He said, Threshold is best watched with a mind-altering substance. I've tried a couple. I mean, since I've seen the episode so many times, I don't know if it made it any better or worse. But a lot of people have theorized that Brannon Braga, the writer of this episode, was on shrooms when he wrote it. I think it's possible.
Well, I think that if you have enough caffeine, it can also be mind-altering. So that's my mind-altering substance. My tongue's getting in the way. Maybe I should just get rid of it.
Just pull it out right now, buddy, and you can slog your way through.
So
now, eating the pepperoni pizza might be difficult.
Unless the tongue gets somehow kind of mixed in with the whole pepperoni thing.
Ooh. Well, this could get very complicated. And speaking of which, we do realize that it is Super Bowl Sunday for those of us in the United States, and that's typically a big deal. I hope if you are having a gathering, you're doing it safely and in very small groups, preferably with family. Please, please, please do not get yourself or others sick. And for those of you who are here, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, BC and Brian. Thank you for chiming into the chat.
Guys.
In 1996, and I wrote this in the YouTube notes, this was when the Star Trek universe was forever changed for good or for ill, by one of the most hotly contested and debated episodes of all time from season 2 of Voyager. But I'd like to start off, Char, because you are the Voyager expert, on this panel. And
well, I've watched it a lot. Yes.
But why is this episode so controversial? Why is it so polarizing in the fandom?
Well, I think what really does it is about the last 5 minutes of this episode. That's where it all really goes just completely off the rails, and you're left wondering, what the F did I just watch? So my argument has always been this, really the first 2/3 to 3/4 of this episode is really just a really good sci-fi concept. And then they add a little bit of kind of like what Brannon Braga calls weird shit. He loves to write the weird shit, a little bit of horrific elements to it, which he also likes to dabble into, which is all fine. But then you get to the part where mutated Tom Paris kidnaps Captain Janeway. They fly at warp 10, go to some planet, officially become salamanders. And I am going to use lizard and salamander interchangeably. I know that they're different things, but lizards have stuck. It's like the difference between GIF and GIF. It's fine. It's fine.
Right.
So anyway, and then there's a very awkward conversation about who initiated sex, what this has all meant. And it just really does not, it's not good. That is what I would change if I were to do over this episode, is like those last few minutes where you're abandoning mutated salamander children on a planet to just basically die off, because there's only 3 of them. If they do interbreed with one another, that's incest, ew. And then there's not enough genetic diversity for them to carry on their race anyway. They're not going to populate the Earth with their species. So, I mean, there's just some things that went really wrong in those last few minutes.
But
yes, Teppy Lizard, the pizza song was necessary to get you in the mood. Pizza.
Welcome. You have DC Stevens coming in here and Teppy Lizard coming in here on the chat.
Hello.
And we just covered, why we believe this episode's controversial. But the thing is, Char, is like coming in as a newer fan to Voyager, I've always liked the Voyager that I've seen, which is very sparingly.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really went. I never went into Threshold with kind of like the vitriol baggage, the fan baggage that I think a lot of people have heaped upon this episode over the course of time, over the course of these 25 years. So I think there's something to be said about how the social media space leans towards helping people formulate their opinion before they actually even get a chance of seeing it, and then taking that baggage and kind of like superimposing it on top of what their experience could have been if they went in sight unseen, fresh.
Yeah. Okay. So to that point, and I'm so glad you brought it up, when Threshold aired, it already kind of had the bad rap of, ooh, that's not a good one, and we're going to pretend like that didn't happen. We're not ever going to talk about it, which they didn't. And so that was just kind of like that Tasha Yar and Data thing of, it never happened. Like we're not going there. But that is kind of like tied into the very dawn of the internet. And I remember being on the internet myself at this particular point, and people are already just bashing the crap out of this episode. So you're establishing that mentality of, oh, the internet thinks that it's bad, so therefore that's just it. You know, the people have spoken. This episode is bad. And it's not just bad, it's a flaming pile of crap.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's, I mean, there is some merit. Hey, Patrick, thanks for coming in. I think that
Team
there's
Lizard
some.
babies.
He has the t-shirt. I don't have the t-shirt.
You know what? I used to have a t-shirt and I wore it so much over the years that it ended up getting holes in it and I had to throw it out and I can't get a new one.
Oh, did you? You should have clipped out the logo.
I should have, but it was getting a little ratty, you know, just from being washed so many times. Like, I wore the crap out of that shirt. I really did. I loved it. And now I can't get a new one because they took the design down for copyright.
I think, yeah, I don't know why.
Last time I checked.
I wish I could find it. If anyone out there has a mint copy or a mint.
I mean, I know who to get in touch with. I'm sure we could get it done. It's just, you know.
A little under the table. So this episode, when you watch it fresh, like I did, because I only knew of the controversy, my opinion of it, understandably, is going to be a little skewed towards what's the big deal. You know, yes,
right.
I have, you know, my issues with some of the narrative and stuff, but when you think about kind of some of the episodes of Star Trek that are the most notorious, not necessarily the worst episode of all time, but the most notorious. I mean, you had Spock's brain in season 3 of the original series. You had Sub Rosa in The Next Generation.
Speaking of goofy episodes that you really can't take seriously, like that and Masks on TNG, I think those episodes want you to take them seriously, and therefore I consider them worse than Threshold, where I can't, man. I just can't. I won't. And I also now refuse to take Sub Rosa seriously, but Masks tries so hard, and I'm just like, no.
Well, that brings up an interesting point, because no one ever sets out to write a bad product or to create a poor product. Everyone has the best intention, because, you know, for all intents and purposes, this is still a network or a syndicated show. It has ad sponsorships that they have to, you know, be accounting for. You know, they have revenue that has supposed to be the rate of return on those advertisements, and so on and so forth. So,
of course, the machine.
You want to put it's the machine. You want to put your best foot forward. But there was something that when Char and I were having a conversation offline about this, there's something that you brought up I thought was interesting, is that why wasn't the idea towards the end of the episode, or why wasn't that last, say, you know, few minutes, why wasn't that intervened upon by the powers that be? Because you fairly said that Brandon Braga was the writer, but there were 3 executive producers on the show. You had Rick Berman, Michael Piller, and Jerry Taylor.
And you have a writer's room with other people where you presume that it's going, you know, each script is going through at least some read-throughs, and it's, you know, not necessarily changing hands in terms of everybody's participating in the writing process, but you would think somebody would look through each script and have some input, at least a little bit, to maybe like sign off. Now, granted, I was not in the writer's room, and I don't know exactly what their process was like. And this was, of course, in the age of 26 one-hour-long episodes per season, producing, you know, every 9 months out of the year, constant grind on top of not just one show, but 2 shows are going on, plus TNG movies. You know, they were, I have to imagine, constantly having to churn out ideas. I mean, it's really hard to be creative under that much pressure, right? Especially with so many moving pieces, people are depending on you. So of course, not every episode's going to be a winner. However,
a stinker, as
how
you put
did
it.
This? Yeah, how? Yeah, I mean, really, there's a quote out there from Brandon Braga saying, "Look, I've written more than 100 episodes of Star Trek in my career. You're going to write some stinkers." Yeah, of course you are. And he, for the record, to his credit, he owns up to the fact that Threshold is probably by far, you know, his most infamous work. It's certainly the most bashed online and whatnot. He's just like, yeah, I wrote it. What you gonna do about it? Let's move on, okay? I've done other things. I also wrote All Good Things. Did you forget about that? You know, things like that.
Fair point. Yeah, fair point.
It's true. I mean, Brandon Braga has written some really good Star Trek, and he's written some bad Star Trek. You just can't win them all. But so, okay.
Before you go on, I just want to put a pin in what you said about All Good Things, because All Good Things has to do with being able to see the vastness of time from the beginning of the primordial ooze to the end of the universe.
We're going to get into that, aren't we?
Yeah. So please go ahead. I just wanted to put a pin in that.
Okay. Pin stuck in that. So, okay. The reason why I'm mentioning, you know, like the amount of episodes they're writing and whatnot, is because it's such a labor-intensive process. There was apparently just a little bit of intervention from, like, in this episode. Like, I think Brian Braga did try to fix it a little bit. He claims that he doesn't know where the lizard shit came from. He's like, I didn't do that part. So I don't know who did. He says, yeah, he's like, and so I tried to work some things through, but he kept it. And Robert Duncan McNeil at the end said, I tried to kind of smooth over the ending, which I'm guessing is the Janeway and Paris conversation in sickbay at the end, which I still have a lot of questions about. I mean, that's just a lot of things there that I don't really agree with. So even though there was other input, it still was kind of a steaming pile of crap. I mean, that makes me wonder, what was it like before the alteration?
We have a couple of really cool, great comments here in the section. I want to get to our listeners for a second before we move on.
Sure.
Let's see. So Brian says it starts off pretty decent and has the rare Voyager sighting of blue shirts. What does that mean?
It's kind of funny because with Voyager being a science vessel, you think you would see a majority of people wearing blue shirts. Not so.
Oh, I see.
It's pretty rare. You have Samantha Wildman, you have the Doctor, and anybody else? I can't think of many.
At Seska for one episode, I believe.
For one episode. Yeah, then they switched her to engineering. I guess she decided to change career paths at the last moment. She wanted to work with B'Elanna, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's really, I mean, maybe the random, unnamed, non-speaking ensign here and there, but it's very rare to see a blue shirt on a science vessel.
Okay. Well, that in and of itself is kind of like a different conversation because as a science vessel, you still have your commanders and you have your engineering and you have your this, then you have, because it's like it's a science vessel with all the divisions. But I see what you're saying. Like you would think there would be like more science and medical on a science vessel than not.
Yes. Yeah. Now, granted, they were going out on this 2 to 3 week mission. They're going to snatch some Maquis out of the Badlands and come right back home. And that did not happen.
Right.
But I mean, they're not going to study the Badlands a little bit. I mean, come on. Yeah. Come on. I don't know. I always thought that was a little weird.
Patrick says we got Anthony on lower decks because of this episode too.
Yes, we sure did. I love that little callback.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping there's more of that.
Life doesn't always make sense. Why should fiction always be perfect? We will get to that.
Valid point. I mean, yeah.
Well, I mean, that begs the question then. Since we've watched this episode recently, I believe you said that you were going to watch it again to get your notes
sure did
lined up, and so did I. But for the most part, and again, this is for the audience for either now or later, does this episode, has it improved over time? Has it improved over, because everything is a matter of perspective, right? Which is another thing we're going to get into. Everything's a matter of perspective. It's like when you see it at that time, who you are, versus when you see it again at this new time to what you have become. How has your life influenced you to receive this content then versus now? And does it hold up over time as being the episode you believed was terrible versus, oh, I'm a little bit more tolerant of some of these ideas or a little bit more open-minded. Maybe it is possible that this could have happened.
These are great questions. My answer is a little bit of all the above. Okay. So when this episode aired, I was, I think 14, 9th grade. And I kind of loved the absurd stuff when they did it. Like in season 2 of Voyager, there's the episode Persistence of Vision, where there's just this alien who's going around getting into people's minds and putting them in this almost catatonic state because he can. Because I guess he's bored. He's basically like an alien troll, just going around, screwing up people's lives, inconveniencing them, and not really causing a heck of a lot of harm, but nevertheless, like, what a jerk. What an idiot. Like, I love that episode because why wouldn't there be some jackass out there doing that? Of course there is. Of course there is. And we tapped into things like Janeway's loneliness and all sorts of weird pipe dreams. Like apparently B'Elanna has a very subliminal crush on Chakotay, wants to jump into the sack with him. I mean, and I just thought, I I never thought about that. So exploring weird possibilities like that when I was 14 was just like, huh, okay, well, that happened. That's going to make for some good fanfic.
Well,
Because that's what I was doing.
That's the interesting thing about how this is received by Star Trek fans, because by and large, we are the fandom that began with this whole mantra of exploring strange new worlds, seeking out new life and new civilizations, boldly going under this entire umbrella of this federation that's trying to find the unexplainable about the universe, the things that will help explain our own humanity, by virtue of understanding other cultures and other possibilities. So does that at all in the fandom get levied against this episode, where fans are maybe like, you know what? Maybe it is possible for this to have happened. Maybe it is possible to resolve our angst about this episode under the auspices of open-mindedness.
Sure. So on that front, I think let's hold off on the whole word of evolution, which is where I think it loses a lot of people, and focus more just on the idea of what they were trying to achieve here, transwarp flight to get themselves home. That ties into Voyager's overall mission. Plus, it's a really cool science fiction idea in and of itself. I mean, the premise is great. I love it. It's fantastic. So
and it
for
follows
that
the
reason
mission
alone,
statement. Yeah.
Yeah.
It follows the mission statement of Voyager. The old axiom, desperate times, require desperate measures. These are desperate times because they know that it's going to take 70 something years to get back to Federation space, let alone home.
Yes. So they're going to explore any and every possibility they can possibly find. They find this new alloy that works with dilithium that might possibly get them home a lot faster. Of course they're going to explore it. How exciting.
I mean, I would love to know if the fans that kind of cast aspersions on this episode are the same fans that would say watch, and this is a spoiler alert for anyone who has not watched Star Trek Discovery Season 3.
Okay,
I'm just putting it out
you've
there.
been warned.
So you've been warned. Spoiler alert. The same fans that would accept the fact that Su'Kal in some way was biologically altered to resonate with dilithium crystal frequencies to create what happened. So why is one okay in some sense and one not in the other sense? This is still the universe of Star Trek. This is still kind of like that. Whatever happened to kind of really opening up our experiences to accept these as being plausible?
Sure. Yeah. Where does that begin and end? That's a very good question.
I guess it really does depend on whether or not
depends on which fan you ask. Hate to say it.
When it was Destination TV and people gave up kind of like their when was this on? Like Friday nights? Or
Voyager?
Yeah. Tuesday
Voyager
night,
was kind of
like
a mixed bag because remember it was on UPN, which not every location across the US had necessarily as a network. Like you didn't necessarily get the UPN network. A lot of times, as it was in my case, we would have an affiliate station, like one of the main networks in NBC, ABC, CBS, affiliate, take those shows and run them sort of like they would with syndication, where they just kind of put them anywhere. So I would watch Voyager Sunday nights at 10 p.m. I'm not kidding. That's when they aired Voyager.
Yeah,
so
I guess
basically I would stay up and watch Voyager before a week of school when I had to be up at, 6 a.m. But it's Voyager.
I think it's fair to say that there is like an element of kind of like fan entitlement when fans will say like, well, I gave up my time, so I am entitled to a quality episode of programming. But like you said, if you do 100 plus shows, you're going to get a couple of misfires. Let's get into the sciencing of it, teching the tech, as we say on Mission Log.
All right.
Can what happened to Tom in Transwarp be explained away in total or in parts by science? And this is where I found this episode really interesting because much to Char's disbelief, I have glommed onto the whole, I want to try and explain the entirety of this episode from that standpoint by using actual theoretical physics and quantum mechanics. Because we are talking about Voyager here.
You did your homework. And I remember when you were texting me when you first watched this episode, what was it, like 2, 3, maybe a couple more months ago. A while.
A while
'Cause
ago.
it's been
Yeah.
you need but yeah, you were texting me all these theories and I was just like, I had never thought this could be for real. And I followed as much as I could. I took physics in 8th grade. It's been a really long time since I've even been in the headspace of thinking about physics. I love science. I love learning about it, but I don't really understand how it actually works. So it blew my freaking mind. And I want you just to dive in and blow everybody else's minds too, I hope.
Okay, so disclaimer, I am not a scientist of any stretch of the imagination, but I'm looking at it from what can I mine from the technobabble of this episode and the technobabble of previous incarnations of Star Trek, and see if it's relative to at least try to explain away some of the fantasy of this episode. So in Star Trek, in the universe, let's discuss transwarp. Now, transwarp was first introduced in Where No One Has Gone Before in The Next Generation, and we saw the character, the Traveler, push the Enterprise to speeds that would achieve this particular mode of speed, the transwarp factor. We talked about that also with the Excelsior in Star Trek 3, which is supposed to have a transwarp drive, but we never got there because Scotty sabotaged the engine.
Yes. Also, we can tech the tech away by saying that the warp scales of the TOS era are different than TNG and beyond, correct?
Correct. That is also true.
So, yes. Transwarp for them meant a different thing.
Right.
We can write that off.
The goal that Tom Paris wanted to achieve for Voyager, to try and find a way to get them back home faster than possible, or at least faster than 70 years, was to achieve transwarp. Transwarp being this theoretical speed that no warp engine was capable of reaching. So
infinite velocity, baby.
Right, infinite velocity. But now that ties into several true aspects of theoretical physics, infinite velocity, and how it merges these three elements that are basically kind of like the elements that shape reality: time, matter, and energy. So if you reach infinite time crossing with infinite matter and infinite energy, you get to see what happened in Where No One Has Gone Before. You got to see realities of the past or the future, and like in all good things, realities of Picard's distant past into the primordial soup versus what's happening in the future, and seeing all the different permutations of several different eras of the Enterprise as they are using their deflector dish to try and close that giant anomaly in the far future. So all of this is happening because achieving this, being able to achieve unlocking infinite time, infinite energy, and infinite matter is where transwarp comes into play. So everyone get that? I think that I get that too.
I'm following you so far.
Okay, so now we're going to go into where I really kind of like mined a lot of fun with what this episode was trying to achieve, and that is, how do we explain transwarp the way that Tom Paris explained what happened to him? Tom Paris in the dialogue said that when he achieved transwarp, he was able to become everywhere simultaneously. He was able to exist in infinite time and space.
So he was a Time Lord. If you're
he became a Time Lord. He became a TARDIS, a living TARDIS. Right?
I really want to make that mashup now.
Yeah. So he basically, when he hit transwarp, when he lost contact with Voyager, it was because he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. That goes into this quantum explanation. Now, there are several degrees or several definitions of what is happening, what I believe is happening to Tom in this episode based on these several four factors. You have quantum mutation. Now, I'm going to read this because I myself don't really truly understand it, but it sounds good. So you have the classic Darwinian model of evolution of cells based on a mechanism whereby cells undergo mutation with a process of natural selection. I think I lost CHAR. I hope she comes back, but I'm going to continue because there's a lot of ground to cover. Quantum evolution is an attempt to provide a theoretical mechanism which would skew these random mutations in favor of some outcome beneficial to the cell. So that's one aspect of it. The next aspect is quantum superposition. And now this is where it gets really interesting because A fundamental principle of quantum mechanics states that much like waves in classical physics, any two or more quantum states can be added together and the result will be in another valid quantum state. This is all on Wikipedia. I'm not making any of this up. I'm not nearly smart enough to do so. Then you have what's called adaptive mutation, a controversial evolutionary theory that posits that mutations or genetic changes are much less random and more purposeful than traditional evolution. Let's see where it goes. Implying that can respond to environmental stresses by orthogenetically directing mutations to certain genes or areas of the genome. Now, all of this is affecting Tom as he's in transwarp. And the last thing is orthogenesis, and I just mentioned this before. So orthogenesis states that, also known as orthogenic evolution, progressive evolution or evolutionary progress or progressionism is the biological hypothesis that organisms have an innate tendency to evolve in a definite direction due to some internal mechanism or driving force. So what does that mean entirely for this episode? Well, it means that whatever Tom was experiencing in transwarp, he was saying that he was in infinite space and infinite time. Now, he also said that, or we also saw that the shuttle gradually reached transwarp acceleration over the course of being able to make all of these different safety checks, all of these different milestones of, warp increments. But when he reaches transwarp, they lose control of it. They lose the telemetry of the shuttle. And then all of a sudden he pops out of transwarp. Well, as he was accelerating towards infinite speed, he was gradually changing over the course of that acceleration. When he leaves transwarp, everything chaotically collapses, changing the actual biological state of him, his entire being, right down to the atom. So when you see him evolve, or in some cases, some people believe devolve, what we are seeing is what happened to Tom in the natural course of our evolution over the span of maybe billions of years within, say, like the 20 or 25 minutes that he was actually mutating, because that is what happened to the atoms or him at the subatomic level of this. Now, like I said, I'm not a physicist. I don't really know like the direct correlation of all these terms together. Brian, you said Genesis allowed is not Genesis. Patrick, well, he did develop a second heart just like a Time Lord. Good point. So when you're watching Tom go through kind of like this mutation, what you're seeing is that the possibility of him going into what would be eventually we would become perhaps billions of years in the future. And that's what I find fascinating about this episode. Now, taking all of that aside, what we have here is essentially a really, really good monster story as well. So if anyone is a fan of The Fly, I think BC, you brought in David Cronenberg. You invoked the Cronenberg in our chat. You're absolutely right. Taking a look at the great Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis movies of like the mid 80s, what we're happening here is science gone awry, grappling with the forces of nature that should never be tinkered with. And what happens is that you get Brundlefly when Seth Brundle tried to transport himself, essentially deconstructing his matter, reconstructing it in the other pod. As the Fly also integrated with him, you saw him evolve into the next species of that particular hybrid of a life form. And obviously the Fly's genetics were stronger because he mutated into an actual giant fly. There was even that great scene, very disturbing, but incredibly powerful scene where Gina Davis gave birth to a giant pupa instead of an infant. So what does this mean now in terms of why I think maybe some fans, and I don't know where Char went. Let me check my text for a second. Her internet is askew. Maybe her internet achieved transwarp. I'm not sure. So, but going back to Tom, what we're seeing is that Tom is suffering from an anomaly in genetic mutation. And can we swallow that? Can we swallow the possibility? Can we accept the scientific, chicanery of what I just proposed here? Do you think that it's possible? remember, we're Star Trek fans. Do you think that it's possible that if you put these elements in front of you, and I know that is not mentioned anywhere in the episode, this is just kind of extrapolating what I believe can be explained away using technobabble, which is Voyager's strength. But if you explain it away using quantum mutation, quantum superposition, adaptive mutation, and orthogenesis, is it possible that this can be explained away? Welcome back, Char. I was tap dancing a little bit, but when you watch the playback, I was doing pretty well, I think.
I bet you did just fine. So sorry about that. My internet just decided to take a nosedive. Maybe it was trying infinite velocity.
That's what I said.
That would explain the massive craving I have for pizza.
I just filibustered that entire quantum explanation while you were gone. So I did go over it.
Fine.
Yeah. And so the question that I posited here for the listeners is that knowing all of these things, quantum mutation, quantum superposition, adaptive mutation, and orthogenesis, is it possible as Star Trek fans to be able to take that information, superimpose it onto this story, which again was not referenced at all in this story, and make it at least plausible to create the shadow of a doubt, if we were doing it in legal terms, create the doubt necessary to prove that it is possible?
Okay, this is where I think the episode fails us in maybe the hardest way, is if this is what they're really going for, they needed to put it out there a little more. They can't just maybe even imply it and expect their audience to know. You got to bring up what it is you want to talk about. And I recall reading on Memory Alpha, that is one of the things where Brian Braga said, yeah, this is where we failed, folks, is theoretically, what were we trying to show here is we didn't give enough of an explainer to really get people's minds to wrap around it. We just kind of put it out there and then everybody hated it. So yeah.
I'm so surprised because I'm not scientifically inclined at all. I studied science, I studied physics. It's nothing that I wanted to find a profession in, but that's what scratched an itch in me when I watched it. I'm like, what are we dealing with here and why? And is it possible and why? And why not? Right?
Sure. I mean, really, in the world of sci-fi, anything can and should be possible as long as you give people just enough suspension of disbelief to go with it. And so when this thing really just goes off the rails, that is when you lose people and they're just like, no, this is terrible. This is trash. What the hell are you doing? And it's that very end piece.
Yeah. But the thing is, I think that it unfairly kind of lumps in all of the good work that was done in this episode, in my opinion.
Yeah. It all becomes trash.
Yeah. Because of, well, then again, that's kind of a Star Trek tradition, at least with the Next Generation, where you have this incredible buildup of a narrative, an incredible through line of consistent storytelling. And you always wonder, how are they going to wrap this up? How are they going to just snip all these threads and tie it up in a nice tight bow? And it usually was in the next minute. They're like, oh, there it is. There's the TNG fix, all in 30 seconds.
Yeah. Actually, I do remember watching this episode for the first time and asking myself that question: how in the world are they going to wrap this one up? So when they do have the really weird conversation at the end between Janeway and Paris, I'm like, okay. But at the time, it was kind of just like, yeah, okay, that happened. I mean, weird things happen on Star Trek all the time. So I wasn't necessarily in the camp of just like, oh my gosh, that's just so terrible. That did not actually happen until later, and not necessarily because of the internet hating this episode so much. It was the word evolution. Once I really understood what evolution was, I just thought, that is the wrong word.
Okay.
Because I thought de-evolution. I was not thinking, quantum physics theories and everything that you just reviewed. When you brought that up after you watched Threshold, that blew my mind, thinking, oh, hey, maybe that really is something. There actually may be some real truth to that, believe it or not. For the longest time, I believed no, evolution is constantly adapting to your circumstances as they exist over millions of years. How can this be? And lizards, as we understand them, are a de-evolution. They are what spawned what we are now and what we are going to be. and future life going forward on Earth, assuming there's not some massive catastrophic thing that kills us all off.
But that begs the question, and I think it leaves a lot of people hanging, probably with that same type of distaste in your mouth that you had when you watched this, is that if it weren't for the fact that they created this evolution, I still believe it's evolution based on my understanding of orthogenesis, but
yeah,
this evolution of the characters, do you think it would have been more well received if it weren't for the fact that they were amphibians? Because amphibians is where they crawled out of the primordial soup after, the cellular mitosis and creating complex life forms, things of that nature. They started at, liquid breathing and we became oxygen breathing. We all know this, but who's to say that somewhere along the line that can't happen again? And maybe just, because say Tom's tongue fell out, there's a reason for that. Because somewhere as he was evolving, as his body was changing and watching it change, represented in the span of perhaps billions of years in a 20-minute time frame, we lost the need for our tongue.
Exactly. The tongue became unnecessary. So in terms of an evolutionary standpoint, that tracks, that follows. Mm-hmm. You might not need tongues in the future, even on a very basic evolutionary standpoint. However, yeah, I do think maybe becoming a more abstract kind of being rather than a salamander amphibious life form, I think, that would have not lost as many people, because then the capabilities are unknown. What they exactly are is unknown. You might show some features, but then that opens your mind to, oh, well, we don't really know exactly what this is, but it's definitely different. And that could track.
And that's like where, say, the original series and obviously using it as a cost saving measure created kind of like these ethereal, spiritual energy beings that were at one point in time like us. But take a look at it this way. Like the three brains on Triskelion, right, on that planet. They said that they were at one point in time like us, humanoid forms that evolved to where they wouldn't need bodies. They just needed to make sure that they could communicate telepathically in that way. Mm-hmm. Why is that accepted as wholesale as it is? 3 disembodied brains in a jar talking about gambling and not lizards that we could have possibly evolved from.
I mean, it's the same reason why Bones could actually use Spock to do surgery on Spock's brain, put it back in his head, and that whole thing. I don't know if it's like a thing of over time nerds have become even more nerdy and they're actually trying to learn real science as we understand it in this time and place to apply to sci-fi. And they're like, but no, wait a minute.
There is that. I mean, as time evolves, there's going to be that interpretation of, well, your tech is just going to have to keep up with it. Your explanation, your exposition is going to have to be more detailed than that. Tebby Lizard makes a great point here where let's see, where is it? Science fiction still has to have some foundation in science. And that's why I bring up these different points, because that's where I see transwarp.
That's why I really wish, if in some really random way, Brandon Braga was alluding to these things, that he would have mentioned that, because then you would have the internet at your disposal. I mean, sci-fi fans have always been early internet adopters. In 1996, you had access to the internet. You could go look it up, or you go to your public library and you look things up, and you gather information you don't have. It would pique your curiosity rather than just immediately slam the door and dismiss it. I love the comments that I missed while I was gone. Genesis allowed us not. I love saying that.
Genesis. I did that.
Genesis.
I did that. Yeah.
That alien is incredibly underrated. I love Star Trek 3. And Patrick, you are making me hungry. I want pizza.
So do I.
All this talk of pizza. Man.
Char, we said this was going to be an information-packed episode. So there are a couple of really good points that I'd love for you to touch on that you wrote here in our notes, because, you have some really good information here.
Oh, okay. So what exactly are you alluding to? I don't know what you've gone through and what you haven't necessarily. Are you talking about the Brandon Braga quote?
That
Or
and then your 2% solution.
okay. So I found on Memory Alpha while doing just a little bit of research a quote that kind of supports that really, yeah, some sort of evolution theory might be what he was going for and does not explicitly state. The quote says, I wrote the episode, or at least the teleplay, and it has some good intentions behind it. It had a good premise, breaking the warp 10 barrier. I don't know where this whole de-evolving into a lizard thing came from. See, he says he doesn't know. I was trying to make a statement about evolution, not necessarily being evolving toward higher organisms, that evolution might also be a de-evolution. Keyword, sir. You know, we kind of take it for granted that evolution means bigger brains, more technology, you know, more refined civilization. That is kind of like the current general understanding of evolution.
Right.
When, in fact, for all we know, we're evolving back toward a more primordial state. Ultimately, who can predict? That's what this episode explores. That's kind of what you're trying to validate here.
Exactly. And there is an interesting adoption of the two terms, evolution and de-evolution. It's kind of like looking at it at a bell curve. Yeah, at the top of the bell curve is like where we are now, right? But who's
we'd
to
love
say
to
that?
believe that.
We would love to believe it. And
if this is the top, this is bad work.
Well, this is part of the bell curve. I don't know if it's at the pinnacle of who we are.
I think like we're at the very bottom of the majority, like the 60-40 rule. I really hope there's more room for up.
There might be.
Just for the universe, please.
There might be, but at the same time, though we said this offline, but we are always looking at this from just our base understanding of where we are now in terms of science, in terms of technology, in terms of our understanding of the physics, because that's why I love how they couch all of this in theoretical physics. Theoretical.
I'm sorry, the comments are cracking me up.
What's
BC,
up?
we are all Devo. Let's whip it into
Whip it
shape.
good. Yep.
And Patrick Carlin brings up a thing that a story I told about Star Trek 3 doesn't necessarily apply here. I'll tell you off camera, but I swear it was her. I swear it was her.
Oh, for real?
Dee Mori.
Patrick must have been a listener of yours from the Wayback Machine. Sure.
Patrick has listened to the Journey, I think maybe from the very beginning, you know, the really early days. So yeah, he's been around for a while.
Well, maybe Patrick, you might remember like what Char and Tristan were talking about when they were talking about Threshold the first time, and bring some of those memories back.
Which time? I mean, there's been a few times now. We did the Ready Room. We talked countless times, I'm sure, on To the Journey, and hence, you know, afterward.
But I like how Brandon was saying that evolution and de-evolution is kind of like what would we accept if we lose like our opposable thumbs, if we lose eyeballs, tongues, things like that? Is that de-evolving or is that evolving? Because when you look at it, it's like we can't be so arrogant as a species to think that just because we walk upright and have opposable thumbs, we are at the pinnacle of our evolution. That's what Star Trek's about. It's about where do we go from here? And we never had a chance to see those amphibians communicate or we did see them procreate.
Yeah, we did. Teppy Lizard has a great comment that I'd love to read. Sci-fi stories are basically history of the future, generally written from one perspective. People's memories are fallible, and quote-unquote facts within canon might just be misrepresented by the historian. It's good to remember that these things are written and interpreted by humans for humans. Right.
True enough. And that's kind of like the dichotomy that I grapple with this episode when Star Trek fans say that it's like the worst episode they've seen like ever. But as Star Trek fans, we adopt the fact that we should be thinking more like what Teppy Lizard is saying, that it's just perspective, but there's the possibility of something a little bit more esoteric than that.
Sure. Which is why, though, we did need a little more of an explanation. And then this kind of feeds into Brian's comment of, according to the few science advisors I've listened to, part of their job is to find a somewhat plausible explanation scientifically for what the writers want. And they did not achieve that here, as we've stated.
But what about, say, let's get to Tom? Because that's a really good point that you make here. The kind of like the clean ending of this episode.
Yeah, I have some do-overs that I think would really easily improve this episode. Some possibilities. I want to know what our viewers think. So they bring up this weird thing that never also gets brought up again. There's like the 2% chance, right, that Tom is going to experience problems with this flight because of an enzymatic imbalance. Well, why didn't they do anything with that? What if that is the cause or perhaps the savior for Tom, where, say, things start mutating and they think, oh, is it because of this 2%? Like, I mean, 2% is still 2%, right? What are we going to do with this? And so maybe they go about it wrong for a while he's mutating. And then it turns out the 2% is actually saving him because it's a genetic abnormality rather than an enzymatic balance. And to do so with the rest of the crew would actually be far worse. And this is actually his saving grace. That is how he can become human again. Because, you know, they tech the tech and the doctor is able to restore his genome. But on somebody without this, it would be a lot harder because they don't have this trait in their DNA.
But they tech the tech with Janeway, though.
Well, yeah. I'm just saying, if it was just Tom, if they didn't kidnap Janeway, if there's not any lizard babies or anything, if it was just Tom and he's doing this, it would be enough to scare them off and spook them, for one. But then two, it's because of this thing that they decide to abandon this aspect of trying to get home, because they never do again.
Right.
I mean, they have enough reason not to, but there has been argument on the internet about, well, why didn't they just do it anyway? They know how to fix it. So give Starfleet Medical instructions on how to reverse everybody when they get back to Federation space, and then it's done. Well, of course, the show would be over, but yeah, you make a good point.
I always had a kind of like a concern, like, if this is the future, this is like the 24th century. We have like the smartest minds and the best tech and all that stuff. Why not just autopilot this thing and get the telemetry off the shuttle and see what happens? Right?
Yeah. Right? I mean, yeah, we should have been analyzing the crap out of the data from this flight. And
exactly.
Really, there should have been some sort of follow-up, some sort of one-line thing about maybe why this didn't continue or what have you. We never got there, though.
It would be funny
I love
like
DC Stevens saying Tom Paris is genetically predisposed to go really, really fast. Yes, he is.
Yes. It would be funny if like Tom had like a little bitty stubby little tail that just disappeared over time.
He's got to wait for the tail to disappear so that he can fit into his uniform right again. And then maybe Harry's giving him a little crap about that. I'd love that. That'd be hilarious. DC Stevens makes a great comment about evolution, about how it's adaptation, no matter the perception of direction toward a higher or lower life form. That I think is maybe where Brandon was trying to go, which is like, who's to say whether we are becoming better or not as evolved, like we're regressing a little bit, you know, going to a state of what we would consider, you know, a lesser life form.
It's human arrogance. It goes back to kind of like the belief that, we are the center of the universe and everything revolves around us and the sun.
Yes. However, what if these salamanders were telepathic, which are abilities we do not currently possess? Or, like what if their communication is so incredibly hyper evolved, we can't even possibly understand it? That, in a way, makes them better than we are because they've got a higher form of communication. And yet we would look at them just physically and say, you're a salamander. What the hell?
Or disembodied brains. I'm just saying.
Disembodied brains.
Right. And anyone like Brian, I dig that. Send this video to Dr. Erin Mack and have her take a look at what we're saying. And I'd love any response, even if she tells me I'm full of shit and I should not drink as much coffee. I'd love that. Oh,
well, it depends on what the coffee does to you, right?
Well, it makes me crave pepperoni pizza. That's for sure.
As long as you're not allergic to it, I think is the point here. Because if that happens, then we have to find a way to put you in a bubble with whatever air that you do breathe. And that could be really complicated. I don't know if we could get that done in the 21st century.
Well, there's the big thing, though. The big thing at the end, though, is really kind of like where I think a lot of fans, yourself included, and to some degree myself as well, where it really kind of falls apart. Like it really is just like leaves that last sentiment really leaves kind of like a bad taste in everyone's mouth.
It does. It's that. And there is the issue of the sex and maybe the questionable consensuality of the sex, just because Tom Paris apologizes for their mating to Captain Janeway. And she says, well, what makes you think it was your idea? Which makes you wonder, well, okay, is consensual, or is consent necessarily a part of this being's like culture, their worldview? I mean, is this a part of the puzzle, or is it more kind of like animalistic of like, we're just going to go for it?
And remembering it. That's a big thing. They remember it.
Sort of. Tom says he doesn't remember much about it.
But he remembers enough that he believes he thought he instigated it. And then Janeway believes that too.
But, okay, honestly, I really don't like the idea of Janeway kind of writing it off and saying, well, what makes you think it was your idea? What if I pursued you and you put out? Well, either way, it's
oh my God,
bad.
your Janeway's amazing, by the way.
Thanks. But like, either way, it's just like, oh, okay, well, if one of you is coming on to the other, like, that makes it better? I have problems with that. Let's not have that conversation. My other fix is, let's not have no kidnapping Captain Janeway, no mutated salamander children, no mating with the captain. We don't need that. Because if you take that out, this episode immediately becomes better. We're not left with these weird thoughts about what happened to the abandoned salamander kids. There's no awkward talks at the end about who initiated sex and then wondering if it was consensual between both parties. And let's instead focus on Tom. I mean, this is his story. This is his journey. It's his flight. And I mean, really at the heart of it, if you're trying to get to the morals and messages and meanings, right? If we're doing mission log, that's what this is really about, is him, like, I don't know, trying to be a better person. It's him growing in some really weird way, but nevertheless, here it is.
Well, he was trying to prove something to himself, and maybe that information would get back to his father, the Admiral.
Yeah, well, and he spent so much time trying to appease and impress and prove himself to his father that this was for himself. And so this is a turning point for Tom, believe it or not. And it's very important to acknowledge that, but I don't think this episode really gives it the credit that it deserves.
Okay, so in the final analysis, and this is for our listeners too, does it still deserve just the epic level of fan vitriol that is out there at the sheer mention of the name of this episode, Threshold?
I would say no. And to the internet's credit, maybe it's just I have an echo chamber in my Twitter account, but I think there's a little more just kind of like playful jab love for this episode now than there was. And maybe, and until very recently kind of still is, where it's just like people know that what this episode is. And if you're going to watch this episode, you're aware that it's a train wreck. You know what's going to happen. It's no surprise. And so you watch it for just kind of the thrill of it, the absurdity of it. You accept it, you have a good time with it, and then you move on with your day. Because really, in the end, it was completely inconsequential to Voyager. It's completely inconsequential to your life. It's inconsequential to Star Trek, really.
Not to me. I learned a lot of science because of this episode.
Okay. You're one of the rare exceptions, Norm.
I'd love
out of this episode. I'm just like, yeah, this is just goofy shit, and I love that. I live for it.
Believe me, I think that this episode is awesomely goofy shit, and I love rubber monsters, which is why I love seeing the rubber monsters at the end. And I do want to make mention of the fact that this episode won an Emmy for best makeup and beat out Star Trek.
I got
Deep Space Nine's The Visitor.
That is correct. So when people do poo-poo on Voyager, you tell them that is Emmy award-winning threshold to you. Thank you very much. Yes, this episode won an Emmy for makeup, and it beat out one of the finest hours of Deep Space Nine.
All I see is you just waving like mutated Tom in front of the camera. I think that is like the coolest action figure of all time. Especially with the 3 babies.
And you know what? Over the years, I've collected so many of them. I have several mutated Toms and lizard babies in my collection.
So now I have to get that, and I have to put it next to. I still have to collect my Garrick figure and my Morn figure. Morn is, he's my spirit animal. Let's see. Tepu Lizard said that must have been the premeditated meaning behind it. Norm, we're going to create some absurdity enough to encourage people to delve into the sciences. Who knows?
mission accomplished as far as Norm is concerned.
I've literally watched tens of hours of quantum superposition, read some papers on theoretical physics, read some papers on, evolution, all this adaptive mutation theory, Schrodinger's cat, quantum lock state, all of that just because of this episode.
Wow.
Yeah.
So really, you have Threshold to thank for a lot of your scientific education in recent years.
I have just enough scientific knowledge to make myself interesting at a theoretical physicist's party. Right?
Oh my God. I love it. I love it. I love that so much. I love that I'm really impressed with you, Norm, at the level of depth you went into to really explore the possibilities of what this episode really was trying to say. Is it actually plausible? And you came to some really thought-provoking conclusions. And thank you for sharing them here. And just also, though, that you went into it with such an open mind, too. You really went in with very few expectations. You knew it was a hated episode, and you were just like, so what's all this about? And you didn't go in with a negative attitude. And so when you came back and you said, oh my gosh, this was kind of amazing, but I'm not entirely sure in which way, so hang on. I remember that text thread, and it was amazing. I love it when you watch Voyager. I really hope you get back to it soon, just because you see things in such a different light than, generally speaking, the internet does. And especially with Voyager, where there's a few of us who have nothing but love for it, but Voyager doesn't get enough love overall still. Time has changed that a little bit, but nevertheless.
Well, I mean, the same thing, and thank you, Char, that's very kind of you to say, but it's the same thing with Enterprise. Time heals all evolutionary wounds, perhaps.
We'd have to ask Janeway and Tom Paris about that, perhaps.
Yeah. And, we need to kind of steer a lot of people's attentions after watching this, to the Delta Flyers podcast and, Garrett's and Robbie's, their dissertation and their memories of Threshold.
Yes. Oh, that was a very good podcast. And if you're not subscribing to the Delta Flyers on Patreon, I highly recommend doing so. Just even at their bottom tier, it's $3 a month. You can get bonus content where Kate Mulgrew joins the chat, and she offers a little bit of her perspective on the episode. It's one of their finest podcasts that they've done to date. And it's just overall a really great show. If you want perspective from people who were actually there filming the show, it's such fun. I highly recommend it. And I cannot wait for their next episode, because guess what it's going to be? Resolutions. The Janeway and Chakotay Relationshipper's Paradise.
Oh, have I seen that yet?
Oh, it's going to be good.
I don't know. Have I seen that yet? What season?
It was the end of season 2. Very close to the end of season 2.
Oh, yeah.
They get marooned on the planet together, and it's the Harlequin romance novel brought to Star Trek. Yeah,
that's right.
And instead of lizards, we have monkeys.
Well, there's all that, I got to set my traps Janeway's way. Yeah. And then Chakotay's I got to set my traps my way.
By building a bathtub.
That's right. Massaging the hell out of that.
I mean, he built her a bathtub.
Yeah, he did. Why would somebody build somebody a bathtub? For them to get in it.
Because he's horny. Because he wants to get it on. That's right.
Let's get that bass line going.
I mean, also, we got a back rub, but give them a few more days, and there would have been a little bit of romance in the air. So
much gift shipping from that episode.
Oh God. The amount of fanfic that has been written since 1996, before that episode aired, because I was there for it. It's astounding. I think it's only surpassed by Kirk and Spock fanfic because they've had more time.
Oh, that's so funny. You get so adorable when you think of Chakotay and Janeway. Your whole being just lights up.
That's my heart, man. And I ruined the mic, and that's oh gosh, that's so many things to me. That's so many years of my life.
So maybe that'll be our next Deep Space franchise, so we can kind of bask in the glory of that ship. Right?
Oh, I would love to. I haven't watched that episode in quite a while. I wonder.
All right.
I don't know if I'd have another take on it, but just with fresher eyes, I wonder. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Do I see it different? Let's do it.
Yeah. So in a little bit of time, maybe in a couple months, we'll take a look at that. But
Let's do it.
for the next couple shows, we're going to get back to our regular scheduled programming here on the Zocalo Chat cast.
Yes.
And get back to B5.
We got a good one. We've got a great topic lined up. Norm, you thought of it. It is about the threads of addiction throughout Babylon 5. We'll talk about Dr. Franklin and the Stims, Garibaldi and Zach Allen with alcoholism. We've got a lot.
Lockley as well.
Oh, and Lockley. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the ins and outs, because you had Jerry Doyle battling, like, alcoholism essentially took his life. Addiction took Zach Conaway's life. I'm sorry, Jeff Conaway's life. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he had his moments of going down, sobriety, which was Babylon 5 for the most part, and then falling down again. I mean, I remember seeing him on Celebrity Rehab. I was shocked. I almost didn't recognize him.
It was heartbreaking.
It was
heartbreaking.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the addiction portrayed on Babylon 5. Was it realistic? How well was it portrayed? Let's talk about addiction in general. So we're going to have a lot.
So be on the lookout for the next link on that. You'll know it when you see Rehabalon 5.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. So that was an awesome talk. And I'm sorry that you missed out on my complete diatribe, my filibustering on science. But if you were there, I would have just been like spouting all this off, because literally the caffeine kicked in super hard right then.
You hit warp 10, didn't you?
I did. I was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So
that's fantastic. Oh, I'm sure it was great. I will watch it again on the replay. Thankfully, I have heard all of these arguments before, so I know what you were talking about, but I knew you were nailing it. I'm just like, Norm's got this. This was the perfect time. The universe meant to put the spotlight on you. You got to take the stage and do a solo.
We both hit transwarp in our respective spaces today. That's for sure.
In different ways. Yes.
In different ways. All right. So awesome show, Char. I love doing this show with you. I do. But I also love having all these people in the chat. You guys are fantastic. Great questions. But we can take this over to the Discord, where we have our Discord chat. That's where everyone else is hanging out. So Char's going to hit that information up. She's going to drop it in the link. Yeah. So if you like what you've seen here, please like, share, subscribe, hit the notification button so that you know when the next episode is going to be popping up. And if you like the show, please share it with your friends, get them on board, have them become part of this community. Char and I have been at this for a couple of years now, and we have built a really nice, solid community of all of you that are here today. We'll watch this later. And our views are actually increasing, and our membership is actually increasing. So that's very heartwarming, because we would be doing this anyway. Right?
It's true. We'd be doing this as if no one's watching, which was the earlier days when nobody knew who we were, but it has helped. I mean, a lot of people have subscribed. We've seen the subscriber count go way up because I think of HBO Max and people watching Babylon 5 again or for the first time. And so that is awesome. But a big thank you to those of you who have been here in the last couple of years. I mean, you guys really make this for us. It's such a joy. For sure. And we'll get back to it next week. So until that time, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm not going to do the BC. I'm going to be like, come back and watch us. Pepperoni. God, I love a pepperoni pizza right now with Bavarian olives. I am starving. And on that note, let's get some food.